first of all, taking responsibility for your side will help diffuse the situation immediately. But also coming from a place of like love and saying like, I'm sharing this with you because this is a wrench in our relationship and I want us to grow past it.
Mm-hmm.
Coming from a place of love also diffuses situations immediately too.
Welcome to Goodbye Hangry. Learning to live a life that's happy, healthy, and full, one bite at a time. I am your host, Audra Budenseek.
Hello and welcome to Goodbye Hangry. I am your host Audra, and today I have with me Daniela and Michael's back. So,
Heyo!
hello.
Meh.
Heard you guys talking crap about me last week.
When you were editing our podcast.
Yep.
I don't think we talked crap about you.
We would
I'm just
never
kidding.
talk badly about you.
I'm kidding.
Ever.
That reminds me. I was talking to one of our clients this past week, and I was like telling her stories about you, and she was like, it's so funny because you walked into the room and I stopped talking about it, and then you left and I continued what I was saying. And she was like, it's so funny because when you talk crap about Michael, it's like all these good things, but you make it sound like you're talking crap about him. I was like, yeah, that's true. I was like, it's hard to talk crap about Michael, though, because there's not. It's like the things that are annoying to me about you are like good qualities, too. So,
Oh,
kind of like I tell you, you can't hate me for the same reason you love me.
well, I beg to differ, but I'll let it
It's a
slide. I'm
love-hate
just kidding.
All right. Anyway, this week we are talking about boundaries. So, have you two ever heard of the phrase "you teach people how to treat you"?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a lot of truth to that.
Yeah, I think so too. But I also there's a point in my life where I didn't realize like why it was true or how or like I don't know. I think at that point in my life I didn't even believe it was true.
Yeah.
It's just like, oh, it's just this phrase that I don't understand.
I think it's something that you learn as you grow up. I don't know if it's. I mean, I wouldn't say that I recognized that, 12 or 15 years ago, but I definitely think that as I've gotten older, in my now mid-30s, that I absolutely believe it to be true.
Yeah, and I think too, the more that you get to know yourself and speak up for yourself, the more the phrase is true, is that you do teach people how to treat you. And last week, Danielle and I talked about self-care. And one major part of self-care is setting boundaries because boundaries can be practiced in all areas of your life. And you can have mental, physical, emotional, spiritual boundaries, as well as boundaries like personal between family, friends, professional boundaries, work-life boundaries. And even with strangers, you can set boundaries with people.
Mm-hmm.
So what are boundaries?
Like you're asking me for the definition or what I think they are?
Well, just go ahead and say what you think they are.
No, Michael, you're wrong. They're actually this.
This is what it is. Merriam-Webster defines boundaries as.
I mean, it's basically I'm not going to accept anything past this, or for example,
You're wrong. I'm just kidding. Keep going.
Exactly.
I'm just joking.
like a fitness, quote unquote, fitness boundary could be, I can't miss more than 3 days a week at the gym. That could be a boundary, and so there's no ifs, ands, or buts. Like 4 days happens. Would be a boundary. That's an example of a boundary. So, and that could be set with anything.
It's funny to me that you choose such a concrete example because all of my examples of boundaries are very emotional.
Well, yeah, but that's because I'm very logical.
Yeah, and I am very
What?
emotional.
You know.
And I'm very emotional. So boundaries are defined as personal guidelines that outline how others can or can't treat you. And they are essential to healthy relationships and a healthy life.
Mm-hmm.
So, do you think setting boundaries is easy or difficult for you?
I don't know that I've ever had to like set a hard boundary with people. I think that naturally people can just tell. Like,
Well, yeah, you can
there's
set
something I'm-
boundaries with your actions. You don't
Yeah.
have to literally sit somebody
Well,
down and say,
that's what I'm saying,
hey,
though, is-
sometimes you do have to do that, though. But it's not all the time that you have to say, this is my boundary.
well, I know, but that's what I'm saying is I think for a long time I've just through my behavior, naturally, I've set boundaries. But, I mean, I guess that's not 100% true because there are, like, work-related, like in our other business, I had to set boundaries in the sense of, like, you know, hey, I'm not going to be available after 9 p.m. or I'm not going to be available before 7 a.m. via the phone. And I verbally had to tell people that. Like, that's a boundary. Again, very
saying no.
specific boundary.
Saying no
But
is a definite boundary, which
Yeah.
I think you're really good at saying no, which is why you don't have to sit people down and say, hey, this is a boundary for me. Because when you say no, you follow through with it. It's not like, hey, I'm not going to check or respond to an email past 9 p.m. and then one day at 10 p.m. you respond.
yeah,
It's like, I'm not going to, and then you don't. And so then people start to realize that that's a boundary for you without you even having to say it.
yeah, that's true.
But saying no is a very strong way to set a boundary. It's a very easy thing for you to do, but it can also be difficult and very scary to say no, or just set boundaries in general.
I mean, you think it's harder to set boundaries, right?
I do
I
think
think
it's
so.
harder because I was taught to be like, growing up, it was like, you're just quiet. Just be quiet. Just, you can be seen but not heard. So then when you're trained to think that way, you become like this people pleaser. Like, people can say and do things to you, and you are just supposed to just like sit there and take it. I was never taught to like speak up for myself or what I stand for in that way.
Mm.
So it was very difficult, and it can still be difficult for me. And it's also scary to set boundaries for myself because
Yeah.
it's new. It's new for me to do that.
Makes
New-ish.
sense.
I've gotten better.
What about you, Daniela?
I'm trying to think of like the best wording to describe what I'm thinking. I think I'm in the same sense where it's unspoken, but thinking about it, I think I used to let people go through my boundaries and push me too far to the breaking point that now my boundary has become more of like a wall. So it's that I just, I mean, I don't want to say this. I don't like cut people out of my life, but it's more of like I just let it fade. And so
Distance yourself.
yeah. And so then like instead of just being like to that person, hey, no, like I can't do this, I just stop talking to them or back
Gotcha.
away from them. So yeah, it's more of like a wall than
Makes
a
sense.
boundary.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I'm glad you said that because I think for me, I went from being like this super people pleaser, always this yes girl, like pretty much bending over backwards for everybody because I wanted to help people,
Mhm.
to realizing like I have a voice. And then once I found my voice, I became on the opposite end of the spectrum. This
Mhm.
person who was like more callous and jaded and like shut off from other people
Mhm.
because instead of giving people the power to do that to me, I just like had this wall up.
Yeah.
And I didn't allow people to even get close enough to
Mhm.
put me in that position. But then it's like I realized for myself that partly at that point it was because I wasn't advocating for myself. So the wall was just to make it easier for me to not have to speak up
Yes.
for myself because
Correct.
it's hard.
Yeah.
Mm.
And it's scary to do
Mhm.
that, especially if you weren't taught how to do that. But
Yeah. I mean, I think it's definitely harder when you think about it more from an emotional standpoint because then you start thinking about the other person's emotions or how they're going to feel. And as I do that to an extent, I also tend to discount emotions when I feel like it's more important that the boundary be. When I feel like the boundary is more important, I tend to not overly concern myself with how that person's going to feel, which I feel like that you do the opposite. You become overly concerned about how they might feel, and so then it's more of just a backup instead of a...
well, yeah, I don't ever want to hurt somebody's feelings or make them feel, I don't know, negative in any way. So, but boundaries, the more that I set boundaries for myself and I have other people know what they are and follow them and all that stuff, the more I realize that boundaries, they don't only help myself, because I think in the back of my mind, I thought that boundaries were selfish because it's my feelings that I'm putting ahead of somebody else's feelings. But that's not true, because a lot of times people don't know what your boundaries are, because people have different boundaries, and it's easy for us to have our own experiences and to project them onto other people and think that they have the same or similar experiences too and boundaries. So because of that, like, I was thinking it was selfish for me to do that to somebody. But when you set a boundary, the majority of people follow it, and it makes for a healthy relationship between the two of you. It helps you guys grow together. And yeah, it's beneficial to both people, not just the one person who's setting the boundary. And the more that you set boundaries, you start to realize, like, oh, okay, like, this is helping us together, not just me. And the more that you see that, and you can see your relationships evolve and get stronger and better, the easier it is for you to speak up for yourself, because you see that it benefits not just you, but everybody else around you as well.
Yeah, for sure.
I would say that the good thing about setting boundaries is that it's a skill. It's
Not a
skill.
scale.
It's a scale.
I guess it could be a scale.
Could be a scale.
Yeah. It's definitely
Could be
a
on
skill.
the scale.
It's a skill on the
Got
scale.
it.
Anyway. But even though it can be scary at first, especially if you've never done it before, you've never set a boundary for yourself or had to speak up or advocate for yourself in that way, because it's a skill, it gets easier with practice. It's like the more you practice something, like squatting, I don't know, let's say squatting, the more you practice it, the stronger you're going to get. And the same thing is with setting boundaries. The more you practice setting it, the stronger you're going to feel, and the easier it's going to get for you. So today I have some tips to help you get started on setting boundaries. And the first one is to start small. So it's common when you're starting out, especially, to not even know what a boundary is or what a boundary is for yourself. Because there's you probably have an idea of what a boundary is, but you don't know the specific line because you've never drawn it. So it's kind of like a little bit of experimenting with yourself at first to try to find out what exactly that is. And you can always start with a non-threatening boundary, or even starting with somebody that you feel really safe with, and that you know they're going to hear you out and respect what you have to say, because then you feel less threatened by sharing that boundary with somebody. And then once you see okay, that wasn't that bad, you can work your way up to more overwhelming boundaries that you may have. And then eventually your voice will get stronger and stronger, and you'll use the success from setting a previous boundary to tackle something that may be more challenging for you.
Yeah.
I think that's how it's worked with us, me and Michael. Because before you, I don't really know I ever set any boundaries, especially in a romantic relationship. So, seeing you set boundaries and how you do it, it's like learning. I get to learn from you and also reproduce the same thing, because if you've never had that example in your life, it's like you don't know what you don't know.
Yeah.
The only example I had in my life with a romantic relationship was my parents' marriage, and it wasn't super healthy. So going into my own romantic relationships, I carried those same ideas of what it should be like and how to conflict management and all that stuff into my relationships as I got older. And it wasn't until I met you and saw how you did it differently that I was like, okay, I need to take a step back and reassess this.
Yeah. I don't know that, I don't know. I think this can be, you said start small. I think it can be challenging in general, because I think setting boundaries is hard to even notice. I think it's hard to even recognize when you need to set one. Because like I said, I don't think I have a lot. I don't think I have a ton of boundaries. I think there are certain things that, because the way that I act, people know or don't know, he's going to do or not do that. But again, I think that's just behavior over time. Whereas if so your example, more people pleasing and feel like you can't say no, I think you just have to always, like you said, start small, but really evaluate, is this something that I'm saying no because I know I can't take it on, or am I just trying to, or I don't really want to do it, or is there another reason I'm saying no? Like if you're saying,
because I'm scared.
right, like if
Yeah.
you're saying no because of a reason that's not really equal to your boundary, you have to evaluate that, because that can get confusing.
Yeah. I think boundaries can get confusing too because they change. The more you
Yeah.
experience life, the more your boundary is going to change. You might have a new one come up. You might let go of an old one. They're always evolving. So just like staying in touch with yourself and following that. Because I know for me, leaving like bad relationships before, I would say to myself, okay, so now I've learned like this is not okay. Now that I'm out of the relationship and I can see it without emotion and see it for what it is, I can say like, okay, I didn't like that. Like I'm not going to allow that in my next relationship. And so then when you and I got together, I had these lists of like, I might not have known exactly what I necessarily wanted it to be like, but I knew for sure what I didn't want it to be like.
Right.
And so I think even, this is one of my favorite stories to tell, but my family is very loud. We're very,
Mhm.
very loud people. And
I wish I could make a joke, but Daniela wouldn't get it, so.
But even like when it comes to like fighting or arguing, we're very loud people, just like screaming at each other. And that's how it was in like my relationships before too. And I remember one of the first arguments Michael and I got into, I didn't even yell at him. I raised my voice at him. And he looked at me and he said, I'm not going to do this. And then he grabs his computer bag. Michael can't even remember this because it was just like so normal for him to do this. But to me, it was like a shock. That's why I remember it so clearly. He said, I'm not going to do this. And he grabs his computer bag. He walks out the door. He leaves. He comes back. And then he's like, okay, do you want to talk about this? And then I was like, oh, okay. So the louder I get, the less he listens. So you taught me without saying, hey, this is a boundary, that was a line for you.
Right.
So I knew that if I wanted you to listen to what I was saying, I could not raise my voice in any way. That I had to like sit down and it needed to be like a conversation between us, which was extremely awkward for me at first because when you're not used to that, and you're very vulnerable in that position where you're sharing with somebody like a way that they hurt you, because that person then gets to choose whether they're going to respect that or they're going to disrespect that. And it's like when you love somebody, you want them to love you. And then when they choose to disrespect that, it's just like, oh, they don't love me. It's like this like weird vulnerable position
Yeah.
to set a boundary.
Yeah.
But yeah, so tip number 1 would be to start small, something non-threatening. And even starting with somebody that like the boundary doesn't even have to be non-threatening. The person that you're sharing that boundary with can be non-threatening to you. And then working your way to like somebody else who's not quite as threatening, and then so on and so forth. So like maybe like the king boss that you need to tackle is like your boss at work or something, because you're like, oh my God, I'm scared to share this because I don't want to get fired type of thing. But yeah, it's just starting small. Tip number 2 would be to tap into your emotions. Michael, you said sometimes it's hard to know like when you even have a boundary, and your emotions, if you have them, maybe you can share a little bit into how you logically define your boundaries. Michael.
Not Daniela, Michael.
I mean, all I was saying was, I didn't realize what you were going to say next, but all I was originally saying is that it's hard to recognize boundaries, and sometimes you have to notice if the boundary is a boundary that you need to set because it is affecting your life, or if it's more because you're like emotionally afraid or whatever it may be. Like, I'm trying to think of a good example that people could relate to. So let's say that, you get a chance to do public speaking, and you want to do public speaking, but you just want it in short clips. Like you just want to do it for 5 or 6, 7 minutes. But someone comes to you and says, "Hey, we got
That's a lot of public speaking.
That's
a long
Maybe
time.
Like 30 seconds.
No, we have
30
a
seconds.
30-minute. This is why the comparison will work. We have a 30-minute spot. we know that you're really wanting to do this and get better at this. Do you want to take it? And your first initial is like, well, I need to set a boundary because I only want to do 5 minutes. Maybe not. Maybe you should be asking yourself, is this more of an opportunity and you're really just scared than a boundary that you need to set because it's negatively affecting your life? I think boundaries are more important when it comes to things that are either keeping you back or holding you back or not allowing you to move forward in a sense of not pushing you to be better. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So I think that for me, to answer your question directly,
You're so logical in this.
yeah, I mean, I think, but I think that is also because, I mean, like it or not, we allow our emotions to dictate the way that we act. And that's not always right. Because even though you feel a certain way, that doesn't mean that, like you said earlier, that doesn't mean that other person understands that's how you feel. So the only way that you can come to some type of common ground or some type of conversation is to logically work through it.
Yeah. No, I understand what you're saying, but I think emotions are important indicators of something that's going on in your life. So if
Yeah.
you cannot pinpoint an emotion, I understand what you're saying. Like, just because somebody hurt you doesn't mean it makes it okay for you to lash out at them. Like,
Right.
you need to realize that you're hurt and then find an appropriate way to communicate with that person that is what happened.
Right.
I get that. But emotions can be very important indicators into deeper things in your life. So, for instance, if you don't have boundaries, some of the ways that you may feel is that you're depleted, that you're being taken advantage of, that you're being taken for granted, that people are intruding upon your privacy. And those things can lead to feelings of like resentment, hurt, anger, burnout. So if you're feeling these things, chances are there's a boundary that you have that you don't know about, that you have not set with somebody else yet. So you can use your emotions as indicators to a deeper meaning or a lack of a boundary, but that doesn't mean you can just like lash out onto people because of that.
I see what you're saying. Well, you just asked me how I manage or look at them or set them up logically, and so I was just saying it's not that I completely discount the emotion. It's just that I try to look at the situation as a whole. But playing off of what you just said, so the example you just gave was if you feel depleted or you feel like you're being taken advantage of or whatever. For me, I think that I've only ever been in that position a very small number of times, because I then always take it back to logically, well, what did I do to make that person think that it was okay for them to do this?
Yeah,
and then,
because that would be the lack of a boundary.
Right, but then I still go back to it logically, and I take the responsibility for it. Does that make sense? So
yes,
I say
there has to be some sort of responsibility on your part, because like we said in the beginning, you teach people how to treat you.
Right.
So if somebody is treating you in a way that you don't want to be treated, you have to take the responsibility of speaking up for yourself and being your own advocate. And chances are, if you're feeling that way, you haven't communicated clearly with the other party that is a boundary for you.
Yeah. Well, I think that, again, it comes back to our behavior, right? If we're constantly doing something this way, and then people are treating us a certain way, and we don't like that, we need to ask ourselves, what are we doing what are we doing logically that's making them think it's okay to
do that?
Right. And that's kind of what I've used to do. I mean, like I said, it's been a while since I've had to like set. I feel like a lot of times I have to set boundaries with like the way that I think, or but not like with people.
Right.
Recently, anyways.
We're tapping a lot into the other tips.
Sorry.
Blurring that line a little bit.
My bad.
That's okay. We'll get into those in a second. Right now we're talking about emotions, Michael, so maybe you should stop talking.
Yeah.
This
doesn't seem like your area of expertise.
No.
No, I'm just joking. But emotions, like I was saying, are great indicators to something deeper. And so being self-aware of those emotions, or maybe even feeling it and then being like recognizing that you're feeling that way, to take a step back and try to figure out, like you said, logically what is happening to make you feel that way. Because if you're feeling that way, there is definitely something that's causing you to feel that way, or a
Mhm.
lack of something that's causing you to feel that way.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
That makes
So,
sense.
yeah, going back and like refocusing on your emotions and trying to translate that into a logical way to help you figure out how to make that situation better for yourself.
Right.
Tip number 3 would be to communicate clearly and respectfully. So whenever somebody does cross your boundary, or you realize that like you're feeling those emotions and you figure out what it is, you need to speak up for yourself and be an advocate for yourself and talk to that person. It doesn't have to be even in a like a, hey, you did this to me kind of way. It can be in a like, oh, you're taking responsibility. Like, hey, I didn't make this clear before. So, and I understand that you might not have understood that this is like a line for me, but this is a line for me because da 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 da.
Mm-hmm.
And just communicating with other people how you're feeling and why you feel that way and why it's a line. And I think, like I said earlier, we project our boundaries onto other people. We think because we have this boundary, it's a common boundary, people also possess it too, but that's not the case. Everybody is different. We
Right.
have different experiences, and because everybody is different and people don't have the same boundaries, boundaries are invisible. Boundaries are invisible. If somebody is crossing a boundary of yours and you have not clearly said it, then yes, that responsibility is on you.
Mm-hmm.
You have to make sure that you are sticking up for yourself. There is nobody who's going to stand up for you. And it's just you. And there's nobody else who should have to stand up for you. You need to do this for yourself if you want healthy relationships, if you want a healthy life. And that's why you need to communicate, because boundaries are invisible.
Right.
And I think it's scary too, because when you put a boundary out there, like I said, you are vulnerable and you are wanting that person to respect that boundary. But the truth is, that's not going to happen all the time.
Mm-hmm.
There are going to be people who will continue to disrespect that boundary. And then you know that that person is not okay for you. And it's okay to have people not like you. And it's not okay for them to disrespect you. But it's okay for you to just like push that person off because they cannot respect you in that way.
Mm-hmm.
Like, that's okay. But I think, yeah, I'm going to say it over and over and over again, that boundaries are invisible, and I do believe people are well-meaning. So when you do communicate, the majority of people are going to listen and respect you.
Right.
So, and lots of times it's either like a lack of communication that has caused this, or miscommunication in some way. Whether somebody might have expressed a boundary to you and you might have misunderstood it in some way. So miscommunication can happen in many ways. Like you can say it in a non-clear way, or the person can understand it in a way that you didn't mean it. So there's like a breakdown of communication that can happen both ways. So even just sitting back down with somebody and saying like, hey, and just being assertive and like sticking up for yourself.
Yeah. For sure.
But just at the same time, like you were saying, like you can't attack somebody else because they've crossed the boundary of yours. You still have to be respectful and clear in that way.
Right.
All right. Tip number 4 is to be assertive. We've said this many, many times now, but you have to be your own advocate. You have to stand up for yourself and create these boundaries. But also, once you've created a boundary, you have to be assertive with yourself. Like we were talking about with not checking emails after 9 p.m. If you set that boundary, come 10 p.m., if you get an email, you cannot respond to that email. Like, I can't stress that enough, because then you're confusing people.
Mm-hmm.
You're like, this is my boundary, but then you break your own boundary.
Mm-hmm.
That is so confusing for somebody else. You have to stick to your guns. You have to be assertive in your own actions as well. So your words and your actions have to match, because people are just going to be like, what? And they're going to keep continuing. It's like children. Adults are just like children, just
Right.
older. Because children test your boundaries all the time. And they know, like, I can behave this way with Michael, but when I'm with Audra, like, she won't allow that. Kids know how they can act around other people. And it's the same idea of, like, you're teaching adults how to act around you and what you will tolerate and what you will not. It's the same idea. You're just older now.
For sure.
Are we? Are we? Really?
Well, I'm mid 30s, so.
Are you? You look way older.
Wow. Now Daniela wants to speak up and be assertive.
Please don't fire me.
You're not fired. Okay. But I want to tell a story about my mom and about being assertive. Is that my mom and I had a very rough relationship growing up, especially when I found my voice in high school. As I got older and realized like I could speak up for myself, and then I went on the other end of just like being this like brash person. Now that I found my voice, I'm like abusing the power of my voice. And unfortunately, like my mom and I would get into lots of fights, and we'd be yelling at each other, very, very toxic. And it wasn't until like 2 years ago. Well, about 5 years ago, I decided I wanted to start working on my relationship with my mom and trying to figure out like what it is that is like that I need to move past in order to work on it with her. Instead of just like pointing my finger at her and blaming her for everything, like taking a step back and realizing that I also had a hand in the breakdown of our relationship and what I can do to move forward, because I would have hated it if at any point my mom would pass away and I didn't have that relationship with her. So my mom and I got into a fight one day, and I realized that she was never going to see my childhood the same way that I saw it, no matter what. And that was where a lot of our fights came from. Like I was wanting her to see how much she hurt me growing up, and all she saw was how she was trying her best. And I do believe she was trying her best now. And instead of trying to fight with her about it and trying to get our perspectives to align, I decided, you know what? I'm just going to accept her perspective and accept my perspective as well, and draw a boundary and say, hey, I'm done talking about this. Like I'm ready to move forward past that. So in order to do that, we can no longer talk about it because we will never agree. All we're doing is fighting each other and getting angry and hurting each other every time we bring it up. So I told her, I said, Mom, I'm no longer going to talk about this. Like, look, I'm sorry for the things that I did to you. I am no longer angry with you for the things that I believe you did to me. I'm ready to move past it. I'm not going to talk about it. And so my mom tried to cross the boundary a couple of times. She would call me, say, Audra, da-da-da-da-da-da-da. And I'm like, Mom, no. I'm going to hang up the phone. Like, I really just want to talk to you. I don't want to talk about that anymore. And it took a few times, but now we don't even bring it up anymore. It's
really cool.
No, it is really cool. And because of that, like our relationship has grown so much from that point. But that's one way of like how setting a boundary can help you and other people. But it was because I was assertive in setting that boundary that allowed my mom to be like, okay, that's a firm boundary. If I bent it a little bit and bended into the urge of like wanting to fight with her, then the boundary wouldn't have been clear. I would have blurred it at that point, and we would have continued the cycle. So making sure you're assertive when you set a boundary. And I think that's like one of the hardest parts, because you have trained yourself to react in this way for so long that now you have to be the one to break the cycle. If you want the change, you have to be the one to break the cycle when you do it.
It's almost like setting a boundary with yourself.
For sure. Yeah. Boundaries are with yourself, with other people. It can be with anything and anybody. But even with yourself, I think it's hard.
Oh, yeah.
It's especially
the hardest. It's
yourself.
the hardest.
You're like, okay, well, I forgive you.
The boundary.
It's fine.
The boundary is I'm going to allow myself half a cup of ice cream, or 3/4 cup, or a cup, or 2 cups,
Or the whole pint. Or the whole gallon. What?
It was a half a
What
gallon.
happened?
Okay.
How did it happen?
Where'd all the Christmas cookie crunch go?
Yeah. But tip number 5 is to have support. So somebody there that you can trust. And I don't mean just like somebody that you can trust to keep your secrets. This person you trust in all ways. They make you feel safe. They make you feel secure. You can share things with them that you can't share with other people. Not because you believe they're not going to tell other people, but because you know that they're going to listen to you and they're going to respect you in that way. That is what I mean by support and somebody who is safe. But this person, you can even use that person to start sharing small boundaries that you have with them, or even bouncing ideas off with them when you want to share a boundary with somebody else.
Mhm.
So you can also talk through it with somebody, practice with that person as you're building up the confidence to actually have the conversation, using that support in that way as well. But also using that support when somebody decides to disrespect your boundary, and going back to that person and feeling safe and having them listen to you in that way, and then maybe building your confidence back up to where you can talk to that person again.
Right.
But I think for me, that's Michael. Probably because you're like one of the healthiest people mentally that I know. So
Not physically, just mentally.
No. Physically, I got some work
No,
to do.
yeah.
I wasn't gonna say it. I'm just kidding. I'm just joking. I mean, if you see
Michael's like,
Michael-
Danielle, I have a boundary with you now. Stop making fun of me.
He's like, my boundary is you are no longer allowed to talk to me.
Don't even look at me.
Like when we were playing Wolf, I said, don't say anything nice to me. Don't say anything mean to me. Don't say anything neutral to me. Just don't talk to me.
Don't talk to me. Don't even look at me. Let me hit it.
So, yeah, definitely using other people as well.
That's smart.
You guys have anything else you want to add?
No.
No. Daniel's like, I don't know what to say.
You got it all covered, Audra. You did a great job.
No, I'm good. I think assertiveness doesn't have to necessarily be verbal at first. I think you could write a note or, something of that nature.
Yeah, if it's super scary for you, you can
Yeah.
definitely write a note. And even letting that, first of all, taking responsibility for your side will help diffuse the situation immediately. But also coming from a place of like love and saying like, I'm sharing this with you because this is a wrench in our relationship and I want us to grow past it.
Mm-hmm.
Coming from a place of love also diffuses situations immediately too.
But no, otherwise I'm good.
All right. I'm going to recap the tips real quick. Tip number 1, start small. Tip number 2, tap into your emotions. Use your emotions as indicators to maybe something deeper that you may be feeling, and then translate that into something logical so you can talk to the other person. Number 3 is to communicate clearly and respectfully. Boundaries are invisible. People do not know what your boundaries are until you share them with them. So you need to give people the chance and the benefit of the doubt. Tip number 4 is to be assertive. You need to stick up for yourself, and then when you set a boundary, follow through with your actions as well as with your words. Tip number 5 is to have support and lean on that person to help you whenever you need to set boundaries, or even to help you set boundaries with them to start out with, because they are not as threatening. So that's all we have for you today in boundaries. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. A great way to do that is to join our private Facebook group, the Fit Effect Movement. All you have to do is search for us. And once again, it's called the Fit Effect Movement. And then we will accept your request to join. It's a great resource, not only to ask questions about anything health-wise, mental, physical, emotional, but to get all kinds of great tips that are mental, physical, and emotional, like workouts and boundaries and all this stuff as well. So a great resource for you, free resource. We would love for you to be a part of our community. Great supportive women in that group. So if you're looking for that support or that extra help, join our group. And until next time, see you guys.